conversation with God. They discuss nearly 2,000 years of history, from the murder of Socrates up to this, in BJ's words, sad age defined by short attention spans and a disregard for literary tomes. So I think I should first begin by asking the challenging question of what made you want to write quite a lengthy and mischievous verse novella when you characterize our present day in this way. Was there a particular audience that you were reaching out to?
Thank you, Mary, for the question, and thank you for having me here. I would like to break down my answer into two parts. So first, I'm going to talk about why I characterize this world in the way I do. When I look at the world about me, all I see is confusion, chaos. And I think the better way to begin my answer should have been with the verse of man's first disobedience and the fruit whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. I suppose we know where all this is going. When I talk of woe, I talk of all the good things being denied an opportunity, and all the bad things given all the comforts and privileges to flourish, to accentuate, to grow. There's very little tolerance of another person's opinion in the world that we live, of another person's faith, of another person's gender, of another person per se. Look what is happening in my country. I mean, you've been reporting on Pakistan for a little while and much well versed in her affairs. Look what is happening in India, a popular genocide of a significant minority. There are sentiments of separatism taking root in Europe, talks of Brexit. The Turks all of a sudden talk of reviving their Ottoman opulence. There are a spate of other small nationalist movements as we speak. And so suddenly the world that I find in my prime years is more divided, more intolerant. You saw Trump in the US. You saw Afghanistan's horrid refugee crisis, and one of the worst economic crises in her history too. You know what's been going on in Palestine. So I'm afraid I do profess great contempt for the world I live in. There's clearly a want of justice. In my land, for instance, the judge is for the palace only and not for the peasant, for the powerful, not for the weak. And if I were to blame it all on one man, my illustrious leader, Mr. Khan, that would be so tragically wrong, because that is not true. We are a people who are inveterately drawn to vice, drawn to all things that are not nice. And so all these lovely words, avarice, caprice, vice, lust, they were inherent in man's very nature. So who do we blame? Do we blame the man, or do we blame the architect of this great scheme? Or shall we blame no one because we are helpless and should just do enough to salvage ourselves? You see, faith and philosophy calls upon us to ponder at some of these vital human questions. I'm sorry for a rather longish answer, but poetry, I believe, and this is my own opinion, is neither planned nor constructed for a specific audience. And so in your words, people might, from all walks of life, even from different generations, find something relevant, something relatable. And poetry is really something that the mind is craving to discharge. You write poetry because you know that all about you is unreal. There's a permanent mark of mortality stamped upon you and upon all that you see or experience. Everything comes to an end eventually. You write poetry because there is a certain thirst to know, a certain everlasting desire to know the world you are in, its intricacies, to know yourself, your emotions, your inward turbulences. And so I simply wrote this book because I wanted to vent badly. The trigger possibly came from some of the personal experiences I had. Some people who loved me all of a sudden forsook me. And so I'm not going to give the details here, but that possibly provided the trigger. And so I seriously wanted to vent at some of the things I had talked about earlier. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. And some of the prominent figures who have influenced your work are quite clear, particularly the Romantic poets. So Professor Drummond Bone compared the tone of your rhymes to Byron, and you also employ the method used in his magnum opus, describing shameful acts in history to highlight the immorality of the perpetrators. It might also be presumed that the other literary and historical figures had some impression on you, whether positive or negative, seeing as you explicitly mentioned them. What particular literary styles or devices did you deliberately want to utilize? And to what extent is this because of the influence of these figures? I say deliberately because we cannot always be conscious of how someone has or has not influenced our own style.
Well, that is a difficult question to answer, Mary. My poetry is influenced by the classics. That notion holds true because my father, himself a man of some literary taste, did introduce me to the classics whilst I was fairly young, not just English but Urdu as well. And I believe a young mind is influenced in various ways. You do not make a conscious effort to emulate someone, especially whilst writing verse. If there are sparks of certain people in you, they might have spoken to your soul. I can answer your question by telling you a story. And this was more than a decade ago when I was studying for my tripos in economics at Cambridge. And I remember it was December vacation, it's very cold. I hadn't much company. The breeze that breathed on your face was impossible to bear, especially in the mornings. But I would still have the courage to bike down to the university library, which was this huge structure, the biggest library I had seen at the time. I would call it the Temple of Knowledge. It fascinated me because it was like a maze. You entered it through one corner and went through a maze and exited through another corner. And by the time you exited the library, you didn't know from where you entered. So it really fascinated me. I had a friend called Anna who was working through some thesis in English literature, and she showed me a poem by a certain Francis Beaumont, the 17th century English poet. It is called On the Tombs of Westminster Abbey. Mortality, behold and fear. What a change of flesh is here. Think how many royal bones sleep within this heap of stones. Those words that really shook the soul out of me. And I started reading him and Ben Jonson. But really, after a while, I'd get bored, and it was really Byron and Alexander Pope who stayed with me. And I read them still whenever I have the luxury of time. So perhaps somewhere in my subconscious, both of them, together with Dryden, have influenced the kind of verse I write. And I also found that Urdu, which is my native tongue, English is a language that I was trained in from a very young age and worked very hard at, but Urdu is my native mother tongue. I realized that it was far richer than English in terms of the breadth of its vocabulary. And when you read the way, for example, Iqbal, the poet of the East, employs the language, you are anything but mesmerized. In English, I discovered it was austere. What I try to say is that if you get the time to read Homer, translated by Alexander Pope, you would see the rhymes are more or less similar, but and repetitive. But when I read Byron, for instance, and people like even Tennyson, I found them pushing the range of their language. They gave me something new, something different. They experimented, they surprised me, they mesmerized me. So I needed that little extra, that something extra to keep me, to draw me into the language. I hope I make sense. I've answered your question.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, think something that kind of brings those last two questions together is the issue of cancel culture, in our modern age, in which figures are cancelled because of some illegal or dubious events in their past. And if we take Byron again as an example, some people today may not be willing to study his works on account of his unsavory actions or because of his Orientalist depictions in his works. Do you believe that we should separate the art from the transgressor?
Very good question, Mary. And yes, I'm a very strong advocate of keeping art separate from the transgressor. I say that because I would personally judge an artist on his art and art alone. And I would judge a ruler, for example, on his character, because he makes certain decisions that impact the way we sustain, the way we live. 200 years after Byron's death, I think it's 200 years this year, we talk of him in light of his poetic accomplishments. You see, we delight in Childe Harold or Beppo or Don Juan or the Vision of Judgment, the Bride of Abydos, and all that remains of him is the written word. I mean, no one should question the eminency in his poetry. Likewise, 800 years after the death of Genghis Khan, Genghis is how he's pronounced in the West, and Changez is how he's pronounced here. We talk of him as one of history's biggest barbarians, who slaughtered people left, right, center, who defiled women, burnt villages, plundered, looted, who professed to be sent by God as a mark of punishment. I hope that you have an answer.
Definitely. And do you think then that you might be able to answer the question that you set yourself, in your work that God poses to the bard in the novella? He says, "So tell me, how do the kings and nobility of the dust fare? Did they make me proud, or was it a nightmare?"
Poses in the sense that he's not. He was found. He was surprised by his own creation. Is that what you? That what you mean? When I think of God, I think of this supreme being. I think of his throne, which both the Oriental and the Western imagery confirms. He positions himself on a certain pedestal, a puissant figure. Yet, as Alexander Pope wrote, the general order since the whole began is kept in nature and is kept in man. Now, I think this could also mean things we mortals do or feel about, or are also a reflection of God himself. As we are tied to him at all times, he being our initiator, he being our creator, and that makes him both extraordinary. And I suppose if I use the word ordinary, it can be used out of context very easily. But you can very well have a walk about the park with him and have a nice chat as you'd have with any mortal you're close to, your friend, for instance. That thought provides the basis, the setting for this drama, for this dialogue. Mary.
Right. And was there some particular moral to your story or some kind of lesson that you wanted to impart upon your readers, other than to emphasize the imperfections and wrongdoings of historical figures through satire?
No, I never thought of a moral, or it was not written to send out a particular message. It is a light-hearted dialogue that takes place in an aerial setting, designed to cheer, a dialogue between two beings, both of whom have very strong opinions about things. And as I said earlier, it was a way of venting out, even having a bit of fun, because it is satire after all. I do not think it has the seriousness or the ambition of Milton's Paradise Lost or Iqbal's Shikwa or Jawab-e Shikwa. The only thing common is the celestial geography, the metaphysics of it. But critics in the process may try to find a deeper meaning to this and interpret the muse differently. But no moral as such, although there is one lesson that you could draw from all this work of madness, and that is the reading of history. when you read history, you stop getting surprised by the things that happen to you in life, because it is usually the same old story of love, of hate, of power, of pelf. Human history, you see, is beset with the usual themes. And a good poet, really, what he does is he interprets life for us. And no one has done it better than Shakespeare and some of these names that I've mentioned. Mary.
Yeah, so even if there's kind of no moral to your story, you've clearly had an impact. I mean, one of the viewers has said Sadiq's poems brings us closer to the global past. The references are akin to time traveling across eras, beautifully described with a touch of emotion and elegance. And so, just touching on what he said there, if you'd like to maybe pick out a specific short passage, which is a favorite of yours, and you could briefly read that to us before we move on to the next.
Yes, I'll just quickly. There is my favorite passage from the book is when the the bard dies, and he goes and meets his creator for the first time, and they have a little um, starting dialogue. And that really sets the stage, sets the tone for this book. So here goes. God, young bard, I see you've arrived, though well before your years. We are glad you survived. No income, no love, a fount of tears. Because all that peril earns you a secure haunt in our sweet heaven so bright and pure. Can't apologize for having kept you with the clerks. Here we have no ranks, no loyalties, no Romans, no Persians, no Turks, not even the English who ate your royalties. Your path's clear should you wish to leave, though give me a few satires if you could weep. Bard. Great king, the pleasure is all mine. I left behind no wealth save a generous wife, a playful canine, a book of verse that should stir a wave. Other than that, a bard's of little worth, though in time becomes immortal on earth. Me lord, my home had nothing, save a few unscrewed chairs, creaking tables, gossamers in the nooks. The ceiling leaked, the landlords were disgusting. Perhaps my fault I quit a six-figure salary to read books. Ah, my fate! Why, when I looked for a fortune, she'd smother my labours with one tragedy or another. Writing's been a hard labour, very difficult to write without losing one's wit. Solitude's vital, so is a congenial neighbour, or else you can't help but snit. Me lord, my oven is full of themes bright. What is it precisely you wish me to recite? God. Recite anything if you please. I take pleasure in whatever you've written. And though there's no discipline that escapes my expertise, I'd still like it in your verse. I know it was loved in Britain. So tell me, how did the kings and nobility of the dust fare? Did they make me proud, or was it a nightmare? Bard. Great king, not all were kind. Those who had thrones had little care for the underbelly, though some were inclined to hear the sounds of woe, needs of education, health care, but most were whelmed in their own desire to make profits or steal the grain of the world entire. That's my favorite passage.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that really captures the essence of the whole work. So thank you for that. And before we finish, I'd like to ask if there are any more plans in the new year for any more fiction or non-fiction works.
Yes, I am. It's very difficult to keep me away from writing. It's just too addictive. But I also working for a corporate, so time there's a certain constraint. But yes, I'm working on two books. One is a non-fiction, and the other is a fiction. One's a novel, and the other is a non-fiction. But I can't really give a set a timeline for myself, so I don't know when I'd be able to complete it. But hopefully, in a year or two.
Perfect. So I look forward to hearing more about that as and when they come out. And thank you ever so much, BJ, for joining me today, and also to those who tuned in live. Thank you. And if you would like to, no, my pleasure. Thank you. And if you would like to buy a copy of this book, it's available at all stores of Liberty Books across Pakistan, and it can also be bought online at their websites, for which there is global shipping. Wishing you all a happy and healthy new year. Aapko Naya Saal Mubarak. Thank you.
Aapko bhi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are
Perfect.
we